One of the truly great writers, I think, in America today is a fellow by the name of Kevin D. Williamson. He writes for National Review. I don't always agree with him, but I do respect what he writes and how he writes it. And it's called "The Question No Candidate Will Answer." Happened to come across this today. Thought I should share it with you for a couple of minutes. Jake Tapper, who was the fellow badgering Donald Trump yesterday from Communist News Network about Muslim terrorists and the like. Jake Tapper was, of course, well, they had three different people who were supposedly asking questions at the CNN debate last week. Tapper pretty much got most of the questions and excluded the other two people who were there with him. Williamson writes, "I like Jake Tapper, but I already was ready to punch him in the ear over the let's you and him fight structure of the debate. When he abandoned all pretense of adulthood and asked the candidates what they'd like their Secret Service code names to be. Isn't that like the old joke they used to say about Barbara Walters? If you were a twee, what type of twee would you be?" She says she never asked anybody such a question, but some of them were quite close to that. So Williamson says if he was at a debate, and maybe he should be questioning people, he says this is what he would be asking. Given that a small number of federal expenditures, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, National Security, and interest on the debt, typically constitute about 80% of all federal spending, and given that we are not going to cut non-defense discretionary spending to zero, there is no mathematically plausible way to balance the budget without, number one, cutting spending on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and or National Security, and or two, raising taxes. So what's it going to be? Spending cuts in popular programs, higher taxes, or deficits forever? Do you think the candidates could actually... Had to sneeze there for a moment. Usually that's followed by two more. Just one time, though, this morning. 9:45. It must be the paper I'm reading. 62. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number 736-0300, 736-0300. You realize this country, I think that the federal budget now is around $4 trillion a year. And the country took in like record tax revenue so far this year. In fact, government will bring in about $2 trillion in tax revenue. It'll be some sort of record, which will be about half of the government's expenditures. It's a bit like saying, I'll give you a round figure. Let's say you're making $50,000 a year and you have a household budget of $100,000. You know right away that you're not going to last very long because you're spending twice what you're bringing in. So therefore, something has to go. Well, government is spending twice what it brings in. It can't go on forever. And I've been on talk radio off and on since about 1994, 95. I started hosting talk radio on weekends. I was doing news weekdays, and then weekends I would host talk radio. And then I started doing talk radio on a full-time basis late 2003 going into 2004. And I've been talking about this same issue all this time. You cannot, it's not sustainable to continue to spend twice as much as what you bring in. And the government has a few tricks it uses. Prints more money, try to cover the expenses. That works as long as you're the world's reserve currency, but when you're no longer the world's reserve currency, you can't do that. Number two, you can borrow it from Islamic sovereign wealth funds, that is, countries that don't like us, or China, and you can borrow money from all of them and make promises you'll someday pay it back. But no one is asking these politicians that question. Instead, Jake Tapper is asking them what type of tree they'd like to be, for crying out loud. And he calls that serious journalism. 9:47. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
Well, a couple points. Last night, I'm really not a John Birch Society person per se. Not that I'm opposed to it. I think that what they are doing is spot on, but they seem to have in some cases you have to overcome the reputation that is perceived, not necessarily whether or not it's true, and that is an issue. And so the last night I was watching a speech given by a John Birch Society founding member. He may have been the founding member,
Robert Welsh.
Yes, and it was a 1958 speech, and it was so unbelievably spot on. they're so right that ignoring what these people are doing is again like ignoring the fact that there could be God. You run your own risk here, and so. But it was unbelievable how accurate they are. But you see, when I was a kid, my dad used to have a bad attitude about. My dad was a Christian conservative, but not as informed as he should have been. I loved him, but he was. Let's face it, not everybody cares to delve into this stuff, but we should. But he had a bad attitude about it, about the John Birch Society, because they had a perception as being radical, and so that's a problem in some cases, because ultimately we have to somehow win over the low information voters and the independents that care. And so it's always an issue, but their information is right on. And then one more point, and then I'll hang up. I was watching football, and then of course Fox was over in Hollywood on the red carpet, and they were all chumming around there together, and then they all got in the room together in the building, and and I said, "Oh, isn't it lovely? They're so smart, and they're just everything they do is so important, and they're such narcissistic a-holes." And you say to yourself, "What a terrible thing that it is that we give them so much credit. They're a joke."
I would agree with that. Hey, thank you much. Football was more entertaining than the Emmy Awards, that's for sure. John Birch Society, constitutionalists, and that's considered radical? I don't know how. Mike Gallagher brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. About 6 minutes away from 10 o'clock this morning, Bill Colley wrapping things up on this Monday. And, of course, Rush Limbaugh will be along following the news at 10 o'clock from Fox, and following the news at 1 o'clock, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, 4 o'clock this afternoon, Dave Ramsey, 7 o'clock tonight. God willing, the creek don't rise. They get to do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Just a quick recap from earlier. I was mentioning this. Top of the show, we were telling you that there are reports that there are people who are going to be bussed in to Twin Falls tomorrow for the event being sponsored by your local newspaper to promote the refugee resettlement program. Now, the folks who have been saying that this resettlement program, A, needs to be fixed, or that the public needs to have more input, are planning a counter-demonstration. I do know that this is taking place at the College of Southern Idaho. I assume it's taking place in, I don't know the exact location on campus. I don't even know that the newspaper has published the exact location. Hey, we're having a big event. Please come to it. Good luck finding it. Maybe they don't want certain elements there, but we have been told that they will be bussing in people from as far away as Boise to pretend to create the image that somehow this program has the support of the vast majority of the public in Idaho, which is certainly not the case. So we'll have more details on that. I'll be able to brief you more tomorrow morning. You've got to remember, too, there's another meeting today of the college board of trustees who also are overseeing that refugee resettlement program. They'll be meeting in the Taylor building today. All I can tell you about these meetings is they're fairly useless. You can go there, you can get your 3 minutes to speak, and these people will just say, all right, over there's the circular file, thank you very much, and that'll be the end of it. They would hope you'd go away. That's really what it comes down to. So tomorrow morning, if you join us, we'll have more details on exactly where this dog and pony show is taking place, because you're really going to have to turn out a response of your own to counter those folks who are being bussed in. And it ought to raise some serious questions for the objectivity of that newspaper in this community. I guess we've already raised that, but it does not stop their eternal perfidy. Bill Colley with you, a couple more minutes, very quickly. I got a quick thing to share with you. 2 quick things. Gallup poll, 75% of Americans see widespread government corruption. Why wouldn't you when no one will listen to your concerns any longer, even on an issue such as refugee resettlement? The United States is tied with Mauritius, which is somewhere, I believe, over on the east side of Africa, where My former brother-in-law was over there on a business trip, came down with dysentery so bad he nearly died. We're on the same level with them. Go figure. 75% of the American people believe their government is corrupt. So that means when you walk down the street, every 3 out of 4 people you encounter would believe that. Government cannot long stand when that continues. One other quick note, Daily Signal today. You should really sign up for daily emails from the Daily Signal. U.S. spends far more on social welfare than most European nations. You keep hearing, oh, but in Europe, in Europe, in Europe, in Europe, in Europe, in Europe, in Europe. That's what liberals like to tell you. That we ought to be more like liberals in Europe. Well, 3 liberals who've written a book called Wealth and Welfare States: Is America a Laggard or Leader? Have come up with startling evidence, and the United States has the biggest social welfare system in the world. And remember, your country spends twice as much money as it actually takes in. How much longer can that continue? Well, Bernie Sanders wants to spend even more. And media will help promote him or Hillary Clinton, whoever gets that Democrat fellow traveling nomination. Have a great day, everybody. I know on those warm feelings, and we want to be upbeat before we let you go, obviously. Yeah, well, all right. You'll have to find it in a bottle, I guess.